Delighted to have our dear friend Krishna Das, internationally known as KD, brought here under his own lovely volunteerism and under Mark's careful encouragement.
Yeah.
And I'm been totally surprised and delighted. And Nina would have stayed, I'm sure, if she'd known. Really nice. So, what shall we do?
I don't know.
How shall we start?
I'll start moaning and groaning.
What's that?
I'll just start moaning and groaning.
Oh, okay. That's it.
So,
That takes care of it. Do you have a mic? Where's your mic?
it's at home.
Okay, Justin, where's his mic? Oh, there's the mic there. You have to clip it on.
Really, I should put it on?
Yeah.
But when you get the harmonium too?
Uh-huh.
I mean, whatever this is. Okay, I'll put that on. Maybe down here.
Okay.
With the harmonium?
You're foolish, heart.
I know.
That's how you do Tara.
I don't know. So,
What?
this instrument is, I haven't played for 20 years. And maybe I won't play it tonight either. Okay, I'll play it.
Take time.
So yeah, I used to play this all the time, and then when more people started coming to chant with me, it wasn't loud enough in the room because we didn't know such a thing as microphones existed. So I had to switch to the harmonium, but I just took it down off the shelf 2 days ago. Well, I don't know if my finger works. Okay. Kripa Sindhu Narupa Amo Tamakun Jasu Bachana Rabikarnaka Kandamandalakaram Yaptam Yena Chacharam Tatpadam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurue Namaha Akandamandalakaram Yaptam Yena Characharam Tatpadam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurue Namaha Agyanatmirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurumetam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Dhyanamulam Guru Murti Pujamulam Guru Padam Mantramulam Guru Vakyam Mokshamulam Guru Kripa Guru Madhye Sthita Mata Matri Madhye Sthito Guru Guru Mata Namastestu Matri Guru Namah Jagadambe Sita Radhe Jagadambe Sita Radhe Kali Durge Namo Namo Kali Durge Namo Namo Bhavakarani Bhava-bhaya-harani Bhavakarani Bhava-bhaya-harani Bhavakarani Namo Namo Akali Durge Namo Namo Taranatarani Bhava-bhaya-harani Taranatarani Bhava-bhaya-harani Taranatarani Namo Namo Akali Durge Namo Namo Kali Durge Namo Namo Kali Durge Namo Namo Kala Vinashini Kali Jaya Jaya Kala Vinashini Kali Jaya Jaya Durga Vinashini Durga Jaya Jaya Durga Vinashini Durga Jaya Jaya Uma Brahmani Jaya Jaya Uma Brahmani Jaya Jaya Sita Lukamani Radhe Sita Lukamani Kala Vinashani Kali Jaya Jaya Kala Vinashani Kali Jaya Jaya Durgati Nashani Durga Jaya Jaya Durgati Nashani Durga Jaya Jaya Om Nama Brahmani Jaya Jaya Om Nama Brahmani Jaya Jaya Radhe Sita Dukhamani Jaya Radhe Sita Dukhamani Jaya Radhe Sita Dukhamani Jaya Radhe Sita Dukhamani
One. Durgati Vinashini. It's Kali calling Durgati Vinashini, destroy the sad states of existence, the states of woe. Beautiful. Calling on Kali, right? That calling on Kali, Kali indivisible from Guru,
Yeah.
to destroy the states of woe that the beings fall into the lower states. Durgati.
And Taran Tarini.
Beautiful. What?
Taran Tarini.
Kali Tare.
Taran Tarini takes me across the ocean.
Kali Tare. Oh, thank you.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Good, I'm good.
Your help. With Richard Freeman these days. Thank you so much. That's like a present. What?
Make sure you're unmuted.
Yeah. With Richard Freeman, we were, and Mary Taylor,
You're good.
two great yogis, we were doing a retreat, and which we just ended this morning, or yesterday morning. And we were doing the Dasha Mahavidyanas, the 10 great science women, and looking at the very, especially the Indian visions of the strong, fierce female. And we made that the theme of the retreat. And from the Buddhist side, we have Tara and Kali Devi in the Buddhist form, the one that's the special protector of the Dalai Lama. And it was really in that mood, what you were singing, that was so reminding me of that. And there's this, Tara, they have their own Tara version, right? Among the Dasha Vidya, and they have all kind of very interesting, strong females, old crone females. And they're really taking care of them. They're really quite powerful, most of them. Not too many sort of seductive types. There's a few, Lakshmi and things like that, but others are pretty fierce, Very much a Me Too vision of the fierce, strong female. So of course, we're counting on, in the next couple of months, to liberate us from the rule of insane people. Basically, let's say. We're very much counting on the female, the woman's vote 100%. Very much. But it was really fun. So thank you so much, Krishna. You know, in India, there is a thing that, you know, there is a suspicion amongst archaeologists and historians that India in the ancient period, what they call the Indus Valley civilization, and also sometimes the Harappan civilization, that it was a matrilineal or matriarchal civilization, and because of the tremendous wealth of and with very powerful, well-established cities, tremendous wealth of the Indus Valley alluvium, 35 times larger than the Nile alluvium, and 20 times larger than the Tigris and Euphrates, Mesopotamian alluvium. So therefore able to support a much higher, heavier population, and very peaceful people. And then the Vedic people came from Central Asia, conquered them, and then things were harsh for a while. And then the Buddha came and opened the door, and then Hinduism ensued after Buddha and Mahavira, many various great yogi types. Sort of opened the door to the more large mass of people, you know, and to their views of life, and then returned India back to its kind of the great mother's place, you know, of Eurasia, the place of the great mother. But it's still patriarchal, left over from the Vedic invasion or migration there in the 3rd century before the Common Era. But this underlying thing coming up, and then in the Bhakti, you know, in the Bhakti and the movement, you know, the devotional movement. And so I'm so happy you sang about Kali. That was Kali and Gurudev. Kali, indivisible from the Guru in that case, right? Kali Gurudev Namo Namaha. Namo Namaha, you know, Namaste. Namo, that means I bow to, I pay homage to Namo Namaha. I take refuge in India. So I love India, I really do. It's really an amazing place, India. And they have, of course, a lot of problems, especially the division partition created tremendous problems. And it has to be undone somehow, has to be repaired somehow, will be. So maybe, shall we have questions from people? I talked all morning, you talked all afternoon. Maybe people have questions. If not, we'll continue to talk. But yes. The mic is coming. Justin.
I will speak directly into it if you could.
Yes, please mouth the mic like a rock star because you're talking to a deaf person. In addition to a slightly demented one, but deaf. Deaf on top of that.
I wanted to hear your thoughts on the way that samskara plays into Buddhist psychology, and especially when, Mark, you were talking earlier about Winnicott, and it was sort of this pure baby, kind of, you know, blank slate and pure parent, but how samskara might influence that whole dynamic.
Who do you want to answer that?
Both of you.
Okay.
Explain samskara first.
Samsara.
Samskara.
The samsara, the cycle.
No, samskara.
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 The impression.
Samsara.
No, skara. Samskara. You know what that, like scarring.
I'm sorry. Oh, samskara.
Samskara.
Oh, sorry. Well, that's samsara too. Same. Samskara, you know, samskara and karma, these words, before Buddha's time, they both had to do with the Vedic ritual. And karma meant a ritual, a Vedic ritual. And therefore it was in that kind of a theistic culture of the Vedism, which I don't call Hinduism, is different. But Vedism, since your fate is controlled by the gods, the action that you do that powerfully affect your own fate is ritual action of offering to the gods, propitiating them. So that's why karma meant a ritual. Karma comes from to do, to make, but it makes your future, it makes your fate by propitiating the gods, right? And then within that, samskara, which is sam means total, is a prefix meaning total, and it's the same verb kara, samskara. Samskara means a particular structure of ritual actions, like a particular procedure, like you do this and you pour the butter there, and you do this in the ladle, and you do the other It's like a concept or something like that, a creative activity. And then in Buddhism, it comes to mean a mental construction, which sort of popularly is associated with emotion because it's deeper than just a surface concept. But actually, it includes other things like a feeling of a deeper feeling of your mental structure, like your orientation, the worldview. You know, I don't know if you know this, but when the Copernicus revolution happened in Europe, they had riots and they had fights, not being on a flat Earth, because people who were suddenly on a round Earth that was going around the sun, you know, felt nauseous and actually vomited, which goes to show, which proves one thing about what I was talking about earlier about the worldview, that you have a certain view of the cosmos, but that actually affects even the way your brain is structured and like your inner ear and everything, you know, so that somehow being in a rotating Earth, you know, made people feel sick, and they went to try to choke people who said they're on a round surface, and so Samskara. But then you asked about how this relates to the idea of the pure parent and the pure child. I'm not sure what you. I thought you were saying samsara. So what did you mean by it? Could you elaborate that question a little bit more?
Probably. So again, when Mark was reading the passage from the book, it was sort of like the baby's born, it's sucking its fist as if this might be the first pleasure it's ever had or the first experience.
Oh,
And then you'd have the parent, the caregiver, the mother interacting as if those two things were happening in isolation. But the understanding I've always received about samskara is that we come with these latent impressions. And so that's also like a third element in that dynamic that might have in some ways nothing to do with the environment that the child and the parent is in and the parent and the child themselves, but this third introject that's happening.
wow. That's great. You really answered that well. But I just want to say that it isn't just also the mother, it's also the previous life of the infant. And it's the predisposition from that previous life, and then it's the long period in the womb and so forth, developing there. And the mind is, even though the fetus may not be developed, the mind is developed according to the Buddhist psychology. And so, and then the mother and child are reenacting the relationship that they've had in previous lives. And it's, it is in Buddhist psychology, if there was a formal type of thing in some future culture called the Buddhist Psychotherapy, although I think informally the Buddhist monks and nuns have done that historically in Buddhist culture. But if there was, all the sort of developmental impressions and traumas and things would all be less freighted on the early youth. It would also be connected to previous life experience. Absolutely, there would be, because it's not considered that difficult to help someone through meditative practice in that motherly space that they create to recall some future lives, at least. And not so many as a Buddha or an enlightened being, but quite a few. And so sometimes the roots of some relationship difficulties and other things would be traced back into previous lives things, which could be evoked in the person's own mind. And I guess the therapist would just follow along with what the person discovered about their own sort of material, if you will. Something like that. So yeah, so that's what you meant by samskara, you know.
I think it takes I think that the Buddhist vision of endless lifetimes, where we're bringing our own karma with us, takes the pressure off the mother, the father, the caregiver, the parents, takes some of the pressure off. With the pure psychodynamic view, then it's all, the latent thing, even if they're not trying to do it, the latent thing is, you're blaming the parents for what goes wrong in the relationship. With the Buddhist view of everyone bringing their own stuff with them, then it's much more about the relationship, and sometimes those early years are very healing, and then the meshing is good, and there's that real sense of undifferentiated union for a little while, and sometimes the fit just isn't so easy, and it's not that you have to blame. There's a tendency to go to blaming the mother, the father, whatever, in the psychodynamic view. And I think as a therapist for people, we play a sort of, especially with the Buddhist influence, we play a sort of double thing there, where it feels like there wasn't enough of whatever that has to be acknowledged, but also that nothing is ever perfect. You know, that we are all coming with our own stuff, that we can accept where the fit wasn't so good as not as something that we have to try to go back and repair or blame, but ultimately as something that we can forgive. And that, I think that capacity for forgiveness is something that maybe, I think good therapists come to it on their own anyway, because it makes sense. But I think that that's something that comes more easily with the view of multiple lifetimes and people coming with an impression already formed.
It doesn't take the pressure completely off, but it broadens.
Broadens
It
the
broadens
responsibility.
the scope of the blame.
To past life parents.
And
Blame
then,
your parents from a past life.
and in a way, also, it provides an opportunity that for a parent or something to see this opportunity of caring for this being, this child,
Yeah.
as repaying some kindness of previously shown in a previous
Yeah,
life,
that's a nice.
and really making a special effort and whatever, and also repairing maybe if there was any kind of negative thing. So it gives all different types of ways, conceptual ways. And I used to jokingly like to say that in one way the parents can't be completely blamed, but in one way the child can feel a certain independence and individuality. Actually, the karma theory is a very individualistic theory, because the child might have been born. It also, the karma theory, which is a biological theory, but it means that mental actions and mental factors are part of creating the being and shaping the being, not just some genetic something, And the child may have been. It undermines racist things, because everyone's been born in other races in different times, and so everyone has been also undermines the sexist thing, because everyone has been born male and or female in different lives. So there's no absolute being a male all the time, or absolute being a female all the time, or even with some of these more exotic combinations that we're dealing with nowadays. Even in the realm of pure form, the beings are androgynous, all of them. All the Brahma beings are androgynous. That's one of the reasons they call it pure, because they don't have ordinary desire for a mate, because they're sort of mates in themselves. They have energy bodies that have both aspects in their bodies, the Brahma deities.
I didn't know that.
Brahmakayika deities. Yeah, that's why it's called the realm of pure form, because they're not looking for a date on Saturday night. They're going to date themselves all day long. So that's why it's called that. In their imaginary, you could say, or in their cosmology, and so it broadens the thing in an interesting way. It involves the body and involves the mind in biology, and which is one of the weaknesses of materialistic reductionist biology. And although the Dalai Lama complains that, in Tibet anyway, he says, and he thinks in Buddhism in general, they don't pay enough attention to genes. And when he says that, he's jealous of the fifth Dalai Lama, his previous life, or the second Dalai Lama, who were very psychic, because they were born in a family of yogis. And it's very hard for him to conjure up his psychic abilities, because he was born in a family of farmers and peasants, And so he's very jealous of his earlier lives, he jokingly says. And he says, therefore, he thinks that people undervalue the genetic issue, which is just, who knows, he just loves to flatter the Westerners, because they need a lot of flattery. And he does that. Or maybe he really feels that way, I'm not sure. But it's funny the way he does that. So, but karma theory is a big thing. And this is another thing of getting away from the psychosis of being this lone being, sort of really made of nothing and going to collapse back into it. That has afflicts our culture. And the idea also of living just for what everyone can get out of this life. And instead, it's just like you when you're young, if you're sensible, you don't addict yourself to this and that because you know, although it might give you a rush, you know it'll ruin your health in the future, later in this life. So you will change your behavior because you might die before you get older, but you will still change your behavior for some existence you expect to have at an older age in this life. So in the Buddhist world, you might change your behavior because of some result that will come from something you will do in a future life. And that becomes part of a kind of, even a worldly, it's still worldly there because you're still going to be an ordinary being in a future life. But you'll be having to book, you have to book a good neighborhood, good womb, good country, good species in the future life, and book a good womb. You know, I call it a womb shot. You have to make a good womb shot. I was just going to write a book like that. And you want to pick a good mom and all this. And in Tibet, of course, the moms are out there saying prayers to receive a bodhisattva, because they want them to be a lama, and it's a way of achieving higher social status to give birth to a lama. So the moms are out there like, oh man, out there waiting for a bodhisattva to arrive, and then occasionally they do, and the dads too, So, but particularly the moms, And if you read the life stories of different lamas, the parents are always like feeling very blessed and this and that, like sometimes because of the edible thing, I think with the male lamas, the followers have a little true problem. There's a tradition that the followers might have a rough time a little bit. Like the Dalai Lama, when he was a baby, people don't know that when he was a baby, before he was recognized, he was kind of a little bit naughty, like. He always would have to sit at the head of the table, and he would like more or less push his father away, and he was like, "I'm going to Lhasa later." He was always like that. They said, and they a little bit showed it in the Kundun movie, but not very much. They want to make him look like a little goody, but he was actually quite naughty, and he sort of admits it. He likes to admit it nowadays. He'll talk about it. He will. And he has a big thing for his mother, however he learned everything from his mother, all his compassion came from his mother and stuff like that. So anyway, Samskara. Okay, does anybody else have a question? Any question? Yes.
We're here first. Oh,
Here's a mic. Mic is being handed to you.
Wait, we got one over here first.
over here first.
Okay, this one, the one, two.
Oh,
Okay, yes, please.
yes, well, I guess I came because I knew Dr. Epstein, but I'm mesmerized by hearing you, Mr. Thurman. So,
I'm sorry, can you speak vigorously?
okay, well,
Yes,
I
that's good.
appreciate
Okay was
the
good.
compliment. I just, you're mesmerizing me, but I do have a question for, sorry,
Oh, good.
Mark.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Just because it's more of my out. So, I mean, I'm just trying to get this out clearly. Based on my own experiences and my own study, like I do find like a way that I want to work with kids and adolescents, even young adults, and like merge possibly Buddhism, meditation, mindfulness, and psychodynamic theory. But so based on what you said, I'm just trying to understand, like beyond what it can do for the therapist or a person individually, like in the therapeutic realm. I mean, in the West, the most significant way it's been merged modality-wise is with cognitive behavioral therapy. As far as I am, and that's not my thing, though I have experienced that and believe there's some value in it. But in terms of the psychodynamic, so you read from Winnicott, and then you talk about some of your own experience, and then you mentioned, under my theory once, you said according to my theory, and then you went on. But are you basically saying, like, if you were to practically bring these things into the therapeutic room, would you be saying that you think the place for like meditation and mindfulness would be to do sort of what the Buddha did, like maybe engaging in a meditation that approximated the Winnicott transition period, and then turning that mindfulness in and actually looking at the feelings rather than just not attaching to them or what have you, and then exploring them, but like as a mechanism to allow one into deeper exploration that you would do in an analytics type of environment. Is that how you think, or do you think they would work together practically in a therapeutic analysis?
Well,
Or does
even
that
though
make
it's,
sense?
even though it's hard for you to articulate your question, I think I understand your question. And can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay. I think this is on. Yep. How you bring the two worlds together, is really up to you. So how I bring the two worlds together has really been up to me. And the last book that I wrote, which was called Advice Not Given, that part of the title actually says a lot about my way of bringing them together, which is not to make it so obvious. If they're going to come together, they're going to come together in me. So in how I'm looking at the problem being you, or whoever is in the room with me. Not really a problem, but an opportunity. So to the extent that I've actually grasped anything from my Buddhist studies, my own meditation, that's going to affect the way that I'm receiving and thinking about your issues, whatever they are. And so the main thing that I've learned from Buddhism is not to overly concretize whatever the problem is. The self, the anger, the issue, the anxiety, the depression. Not that I won't treat it with drugs if it needs to be treated, but in terms of working with somebody's psyche, to the extent that they haven't yet grasped what there is to grasp from Buddhism, they're going to be concretizing something or other. Their childhoods, their issues, the other person who's mistreating them, their own badness, their own anxiety. So my job is to make whatever is concretized in the vision of the other, to make it more fluid, if that makes any sense, to help them reify, deconcretize, to stop clinging. My job is to help them stop clinging to whatever it is they're clinging to. That's the first, second, and third, and fourth noble truth. The cause of suffering is clinging, and there is release from clinging, and here's how you do it. So I have to try to help a person do it for themselves. Show them where they're clinging and show them that it's possible for them not to be clinging. So that's not just cognitive therapy, although one can work it cognitively if one wants to. So that's all. If I have to say how I'm thinking about it, that's how I'm thinking about it. And that's where the therapy relationship, where I'm actually hearing where it is that you're feeling stuck, and then I'm doing whatever I can to help you unstick from that place. I'm having to put what I hope I understand, which maybe I understand, I have to put it into practice in a skillful way for you. So that's,
Yeah. And your advice not given, you don't just tell people to go meditate.
No.
Not at all.
No.
I know. Some people would be really bad to meditate
right,
if they were in a certain state.
right.
And I've always
said that.
Always.
Yeah. Does that make any sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, it does.
Okay.
I have some, no.
And I think if you're a therapist or training as a therapist or wanting to bringing it together in your own way, you bringing it together in your own way, in yourself and in your work with people, where you don't have to be necessarily saying what's Buddhist and what isn't Buddhist, but where it's really one thing that's you. That's what I've been very hesitant to make a school of here's how you do it kind of thing. That's why all my books are a little bit evasive around that issue, while I'm still trying to lay the groundwork for how one might do it.
Yeah.
But if I can say it, yeah, as an outsider, as
Yes.
a Buddhist yogi, philosopher point of view, what you're doing is very much in the spirit of what the Buddha did. The Buddha was not a dogmatist. He did not announce the truth that everybody, even the translation of the Four Noble Truths as truths, you could translate those as the Four Noble Facts.
Mm.
You know, they're facts rather than truths. They translate it as truth because they wanted this is a religion, so they're gonna have something to believe in.
Mm.
So because religions have credos. Meanwhile, Buddha did not promote that you should believe this and that. Even he didn't say you should believe yourself. He said you should investigate yourself. And he approached different people precisely with whatever was appropriate for them.
Yeah.
Which is why there's so much philosophical focus in Buddhism on hermeneutics, because he told different things to different people depending on what they needed. And and some people he said this, some people he said that.
That's what it's like to be a therapist.
So that's a Socratic. It's a Socratic method. Right?
I'm different with every person. I have a different. I'm singing a different tune.
Right. So that's very cool. And even in Buddhist philosophy, what they call the dialectical centrist, the highest form, the way the Tibetans have organized the whole Indian history of their own, is someone who doesn't have a rigid view of their own. They're not imposing a rigid worldview, so they see what the other person is stuck, and then they use this thing called dialectical consequence. So they draw out the implications of what the other person is sort of stuck in a certain thing. What are the implications of it? And then that person sees themselves that what they're holding on to that doesn't make any sense at a certain point, rather than feeling they're opposing another person and getting their ego stuck behind their worldview.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. But then they have a big thing about how that no worldview is not no worldview. It's the worldview of no worldview.
Yeah.
So that because you have to have a point of view also, since you're human being interacting with somebody, you have a bit of a point of view, even if it's an open point of view.
That thing of seeing where someone.
So that's very in line.
That's very much what you're looking to
That's why I love him.
be able to do.
He's still learning too. He's learning more things all the time. He's not like, I know everything. Anybody who's like that is all great. Thank you. That's good. Enjoy it. Keep it to yourself. You had a question? Yes.
I'd like to return to non-duality in the face of
Oh
cannibalism,
my
please.
goodness. Yes.
I'm trying to love all, serve all,
Yes.
but I'm a
Excellent.
failure at it.
Oh, well,
People
that's a
can
good beginning.
So people can tick me off, and then I tick me off. I'm getting tired of myself, and I'd like to know, what do I do? The precious jewel stance of the person who willfully wishes you harm isn't really working for me.
I see.
Part of the reason that I came here was to try to take away the feeling of contempt. My two great vices would be envy and contempt.
Take away the feeling of envy and contempt?
Yes,
You want to take it away?
yes,
From where?
me.
Where you want to take it to? Where are you going to find it and where are you going to take it to?
That's complicated, isn't it?
Well, okay. So with non-duality is the highest teaching, supposedly, and it means that the absolute is this relative, right? So it means there's no escape from this relative, except in seeing it all as the ultimate, and therefore being completely committed with what you would think you would be committed to. Should you discover an absolute, would you be to like people have like visions of the absolute God, and then they just do whatever, so they become committed to that. But are you committed then to the relative like that? And if committed to relative like that, each specific piece of the relative, and if committed to relative like that, make it better always. Never make it worse. And therefore, that's wisdom becoming compassion, right? Cause no harm, and if possible, cause help, benefit. And that becomes your absolute concern rather than finding your own precious nirvana And apparently, if you totally do that, and you have body, speech, and mind, and visceral level, you are yourself very happy, supposedly, and super happy. So in your case, you are ticked off first by other people, you said, and then you get ticked off with yourself for being ticked off. And that's a very good start. And hopefully you don't, rather than beating on other people, you beat on yourself. And that's a good thing. But then beating on yourself does what good? How do you beat on yourself? You beat on yourself by trying to understand the root of what makes you so ticked off. And then the root of that has to do with the way you hold your ego. Your ego is a pronoun, and all psychiatrists can relax that they were so terrified in the 50s and 40s and Carl Jung and 60s and 20s, I don't know when, that they would be really terrible. And that if all people got involved in Eastern teachings and they trashed their egos, they would all be wearing diapers. They wouldn't know when to pee or not pee. They wouldn't know how to cross the street or not cross the street. They could not organize their behavior in any way. And that's completely false, because the quest of enlightenment involves having a strong ego. But it has an ego that you are directing in a positive direction, which you know is positive, because you know that when you're not ticked off at somebody, and even when you like them, you deal with them more skillfully, and you want to be helpful to them, and you want to be successfully helpful. So you'll even be artful about being helpful. You won't necessarily rush up and give a big hug to somebody who might be repelled by you. You'll be nice. You'll give them a flower and stay away. Especially in the Me Too thing, you're not going to give too many big hugs. So the point is that you know that already. But it's hard to overcome it because we have all these tendencies to be ticked off by all these things. So the thing is to bit by bit, baby steps. I'm sure by the smile on your face, in addition to the shine on your head, which is like a Buddhist monk. That's behavioral conditioning, operant conditioning. Buddhist monks and nuns go into behavioral modification, definitely, the way they move there. They're like military, like counter-military, peaceful military. So the point is baby steps. If you were pissed off and ticked off for 20 minutes or 3 minutes, and the next time only 2 minutes, that's progress. And don't feel because you couldn't completely get rid of it instantaneously that it was not progress. And you just have to patiently stay at it. It takes a long time to overcome deeply ingrained habits based on you're thinking that you're the real thing, and other people disagreeing. And when they do something that annoys you, it's because they think they're the real thing instead of you. And that's the original annoying thing. Everybody's ticked off at everybody. That's why everybody's so paranoid. Because you know that unless you're enlightened, in which case I apologize, but otherwise you know you're the main person in the room. This is your retreat, this is your question, this is your thing, this is your... And then therefore you subliminally know instantly that everybody else thinks that same way. So therefore we're all the most important person here. And therefore we all know that nobody else agrees with us. But we're all nice because we're being Buddhist and yogi and psychotherapeutic. So we're being nice and there's enough food and shelter and warm clothing and so on. But if it was a crisis, then we would see, how deeply ingrained the self-identity habit, instinctually even, it becomes. So that's the real root of things. And it takes a strong ego in the sense of strong motivation, a heroic motivation, a hero or a heroine, to decide that I'm going to find out why I'm pushed around. Not only am I pushed around by people outside, politicians, police, other colleagues, partners, relatives, siblings, etc. Not only do they push me around, but my own impulses push me around and make me do things that I don't want to do and that I know by experience. Like when I get ticked off, I do the wrong thing with whoever it is, and then there's a blowback. I know that, and yet it still happens. So that means I'm helplessly acting on an impulse that I can't control. And so to decide I'm going to find out the root of that impulse, I'm going to bit by bit reshape that kind of release, arisal and release and exercise of energy is a heroic motivation because it's not easy. It's easier to conquer some other people and manipulate them around than to conquer yourself. And that's what it's all about, either Buddhism or psychotherapy, actually, I think. I don't know about, I'm not speaking as an authority with you, but someone learns to change their narrative about themselves, where they are living a different story, where they're a little bit more in charge.
Yeah.
And they can be more positive, and they can be nicer to others, and be happy themselves. And of course, the other motive you have is very well when you get ticked off with people, they'll get ticked off back, and you'll have a nasty time. And if you're nice to them, and especially if it's motivated by a genuine feeling of niceness, which you can develop in you, and you already have, look at that smile, you have a great smile. And then they'll be nice back to you, and it'll just be a virtuous circle. Being angry with each other is a vicious circle, and it never ends. So therefore, there's that teaching of what's called mind transformation, which is, or mind, they have different words for it, I think, mind practice. Everybody's practicing. I'm so fed up with people practicing. We really would like to see people performing instead of practicing all the time. Living up to going a little past what they expect of themselves and surprising themselves. That would really be great. I'm practicing. Everybody's, I'm practicing. I don't know. So the point is, I don't know what the point is. Just be cheerful, And you enjoy yourself. Just don't complain. Does that tick you off? No, it doesn't. It doesn't, because I'm not motivated to tick you off. Yes. Yes, my Zen friend.
Sorry, it's just a follow-up to his question.
Oh, Lynn. Oh, yes, Lynn. Yes, come down.
Stop it. So I'm sorry, because I was going to ask a similar question. I kind of have a problem with ego, or the word ego, or that description, because it's hard because ego, I think, particularly in our culture, it has this negative connotation, right? And to your point, it's a pronoun. And then the self, and to an extent, it seems like it's an important boundary. It's an important individual boundary, right?
Uh-huh.
And so, well, two things. The first part is, and the exercise that we did in the meditation, where we were to think about being accused, or having that feeling falsely accused. That was to identify the self, right?
The self that doesn't exist.
So,
and is that
to show how deep in the gut is the feeling of one's own self-absoluteness.
Exactly. And is that similar to? There's a story about the nuns in the forest school who go into the forest at night to be scared, so that they, the story. I can't remember where it comes from, but in any event, I think it's in Thailand's forest one day at night. They go into the forest at night, and it's an exercise to.
It's probably similar.
Yeah.
All the stories are the same.
But that's a similar thing, right? To identify the self.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's hard to find.
So just because I'm trying to get around the notion of the self and the boundary, because there's the other part, which is if you are creative and you're making art, and you have to somehow have that suspension of disbelief that what you're making is special, right?
Yeah.
What you're doing is special, but at the same time, there is a sort of sense of ego, using that same word, in order to be motivated to be creating and to sort of presenting to the world something that you've made, right? So where is that boundary? Where is the boundary of where the self is that sort of harmful?
There's different boundaries. You say that the ego, which is just a pronoun from the Buddhist point of view, you say that it's a necessary and very important boundary. But actually, whenever the ego finds any kind of satisfaction, the self or the person, the relative self, which is the only one we've ever had, is when it transcends itself. Actually, when we don't focus on the self, we can have rapture. We can be transported. We can have aesthetic experience. When the famous Dogen, to find the self, forget about yourself, the truth to discover, right? There's the famous thing that Dogen rightly says, and his whole thing about the river of cheese or something, some really funny thing, great Soto Zen master, in Japan. And so the self is an important boundary, yes, but then it's important to transcend. And of course, ultimately, one does transcend it because one dies and one has transcendent states where there's no sense of a pronoun, no use of language. So I'm just saying the thing about like someone who becomes a Buddha, a complete enlightened being, or even a Bodhisattva, requires a heroic level of ego. But it's where the ego is your tool. It's like language is a tool, right? It's a technology, actually, languages, that the human animal has developed. It is a technology to communicate because it enables you through language. We share minds imperfectly, as we may, but when you speak and someone else opens their mind to listen to what you mean, when you listen, they enter, you open your mind to them. And then you have memory and you have like a recorded history and all this kind of thing, or memorized history if it's not written. And therefore you get the knowledge of many beings. You can expand that. So that's a human great thing. It's language, right? Even though it ultimately is beyond words, language is the most high, extreme, amazing technology. And it is so great that all the gods of language are all goddesses. The males use that tool also, but the speech itself is an Indian thing and the Buddhist thing. They're all goddesses, and therefore the misteaching of the Buddhist idea that the idea is to have no language is not correct. If you suppress your ability to speak and to use language, then you suppress your ability to unravel the level of ego where you're the helpless victim of someone in there who you think is you, who tells you, get mad at this person, kill that person, steal this thing, give this thing, do that, do the other, and you helplessly have to do whatever it tells you. Because it becomes an irresistible motive that seems to come from an absolute source. And so you're a kind of ego fanatic, if you will, instead of a religious fanatic. And it easily aligns, the God theory of the absolute God who gives orders to the devotee. That's a projection, of course, of the sense of the absolute self in here. You can't find it, so you say, oh, there's one in the sky, and then he has a scripture and he tells me to go kill the infidel, type of thing. And not all of them have that kind of attitude. So I don't know, we all have a problem with the ego, but on the other hand, it's immensely useful. And but it's when the ego is yours and you don't belong to the ego. It's not your master, it's not your boss. And most people, their ego bosses them around. I think at least that's what Mark meant in the name of this seminar, or whatever this is, this retreat, about the problem of the ego.
But
Right?
it feels like it's
No,
only
right?
the negative
You address
actions that are related to the ego.
Say again?
It's only the negative actions that are related to the ego. But the positive.
No, I think we don't have to think about the ego as bad. Okay, you can think about mindfulness meditation as an ego function. In fact, okay, we're using the ego to undermine its own sense of omnipotence. To undermine its tendency to order us around, like Bob's just saying. It's a lousy master, it's a good servant. So it's how do we take control of the ego, not to eliminate it. That's a mistake, it's sort of beginner's mistake. If you eliminate the ego, then you just become like psychotic, basically. We need our ego. It develops from the age of 2 or 3. It comes with the intellect and so on. But like I've been trying to talk about and will continue to talk about, it can take over, so that we are serving this idealized view of who we're supposed to be, which is totally in control and master of the universe, master of ourselves, but we don't really know how to be master of ourselves, so we institute this false thing. Bob tells this nice story about his first teacher, his Mongolian Lama in New Jersey, saying that the problem of Westerners is not that they don't have a self or that they don't think that they're real. Like, of course they're real, but we mostly think that we're really real.
As he always used to say. And even long before the Matrix, he used to say, everybody goes around secretly thinking, I'm the one. So when I saw The Matrix, I bowed to the Wachowski brothers. It wasn't that time. They were brothers at that time. Now they're sisters. But anyway, the main problem with ego, what you have a problem with is it's a pronoun. And then the Greek pronoun is not the English pronoun. If it was just the I we were talking about, it would seem less problematic, wouldn't it? I am, maybe someone told me, I didn't really read it in the German, but someone told me that Freud used the word ich.
Yeah, Freud.
That's ich.
Yeah.
He didn't use the word ego. That was his translator. And so when you hear the Greek word, you think it's a technical term, and you get all bollocked up about it. If you ever sat at a dining table or something in Greece with a bunch of Greek friends, and you're the only one who doesn't know Greek, but then occasionally they get into conversations in Greek, it's the most horrifying thing. You feel like you're in a room of atomic physicists or psychiatrists. They're all analyzing everything. It's all gnosis, sycobosis, osmosis. And meanwhile, they're just gossiping. And you think they just analyze you, and they're like really high people, because the Greek has this like impressive quality to us, Anglos, English-speaking people. So it's just the I. Don't worry about it.
The thing that helped me with all this ego talk is to think about ego functions. They're different from the psychoanalytic point of view, from the psychodynamic point of view, there are different ego functions. So that instead of the ego being a noun, the ego function is like a verb. So sometimes we need the ego function to help us. The ego mediates between inner reality and outer reality, between impulses and ethics. It's a mediator. So there are many functions that it serves. Mindfulness is an ego function because we're deploying our attention. We're deploying ourself in a certain direction. That's an ego function. So when the ego becomes concretized in this, like I'm the most important, I'm the only one, that's where we're overdoing the ego, and it's starting to drive us around. Right? So our sort of the meditative task is to train the ego so that it serves us in whatever capacity we need.
Okay, another question.
No, my question wasn't your question. The answer was
You never asked your question.
I was in her question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was kind of similar to what I was going to ask.
Okay. Is there another one?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Got one. Patiently.
Yes.
So this might be kind of a broad question, but
The mic right there.
okay, hi. It might be kind of a broad question, but so obviously everyone here, we're all working toward or thinking about or working on practicing, doing more, being better, doing better. But we're all here, and these traits have been passed down to us. So I guess my question is just like, are survival instincts just kind of inherently at odds with freedom and peace in the way that we're all kind of, I guess, looking for it?
Well, that's a very big question, but there's two. The female has a survival reaction in a crisis of release of oxytocin. Neuroscientists will tell you, which is somehow is a bindu, as we would say in tantric abhidharma. It's like a neurotransmitter that makes you look laterally, horizontally for resources, reinforcements, connections. And the male releases cortisol, which is, gets him to charge straight ahead and do something aggressive in a crisis situation. So we are all brainwashed and trained that the direct aggressive attack, or best defense is an offense, you'll hear, is the survival instinct, is automatically connected to that. But it could be that the cooperative, looking at the bigger picture, seeing it from another perspective, certainly the martial arts sciences developed in Asia, Qigong, Tai Chi, Aikido, etc., and the Kshatriya arts of India, and some Persians have them, that they evolved not being violent reacting, but reacting by seeing it from the attacker's perspective and turning the attacker's imbalance and hostility back against itself, other than just pounding back at it type thing. So it depends on how you define the survival instinct. But I personally have a view, if if you look at my Inner Revolution book or something, I have a view that in polities, nations or tribes, the survival instinct has meant keeping up the last few thousand years at least of recorded time, has meant keeping up a strong defense and even a bit of offensive defense. It has meant that. And therefore, more gentle and less violent, more civilized societies have tended to be submerged under less civilized ones. And that is a pattern in history, and it's certainly a pattern in the Buddhist history. India was overrun eventually, and as I think I said earlier, or I get confused which retreat I'm in and what I said when. I apologize for repeating myself. But there are modern Indian Hindu saints who blame Buddhism for making India too demilitarized, and they're being therefore victimized by Islamic invasions from Persia and Central Asia, and then later by European invasion. And Chinese have similar feeling that the Buddhism made them susceptible to the Mongol conquest and then the Manchu conquest, and then they never were fully conquered by the Europeans, China. So much as they whine about 100 years of disgrace, they were actually conquered by Manchurians, not by foreign Europeans. They were occupied by Manchuria. So the thing is, that's been true up to now. But now we see a strange phenomenon on the planet, which is nobody can win a war. Violence seems to be endlessly cycling back and forth. The cycles of vengeance and everything seems to be unlimited. Taliban's will arise when you try to domineer anybody. And nobody's won anything lately, And even Gandhi would question whether we really won the Second World War, or we turned, Russia certainly, the Western people wouldn't think Russia had a victory out of the Second World War because it empowered Stalin to be even crazier. And we don't think of our CIA as being even crazier, but Gandhi predicted it would be after we defeated the Germans violently. So it seems that the planet now is forcing human beings to try to realign their survival instinct more around oxytocin and more around nonviolence and intelligence and negotiation and dialogue in resolving conflict than just kill the other one. It seems, because the militarization of the planet is obviously not sustainable. It could lead in any 24-hour period to utter nuclear winter, as we know. We have some people in charge of these little computer equipment who we would not call psychological giants, to put it mildly. And then on the other hand, it distracts from expenditure of alternative energy and buying out the oil industry, and et cetera, and saving us from the consumer greed destruction that we're also raking upon ourselves. So it does seem that these virtues of control of greed and hate, which seems to be doable ultimately only on a deeper understanding of the hard wiring or soft wiring around the false core of an absolute ego or self. It seems this has become a survival necessity.
Yeah.
And the ability precisely to transcend boundaries and decide that a black person is a human, or a white person is a human, or a yellow person is a human, or a red person is equally human as whatever color you boundary yourself as, or transgender is still human, or whatever. All these things that these boundaries get inflated into, which is initially the personal boundary of I'm the absolute, and therefore my group is the absolute, and people like me on absolute, and the others are less than us, less human than us, which is causing all this trouble. And we see it every day on CNN. If you watch it, you have time to take a peek, right? So it seems we're at a moment in history that is a remarkable opportunity as well as a huge danger, where finally, if you're an Indian, you're not going to be, if you become, violent, nobody is going to really manage to conquer you, really, because it's not economical, right? So maybe there's hope. Some people say it'll be another few hundred years we'll go on like this. I hope that's not true, right? And even but also it's not only a utilitarian or an instrumental thing. It's also a choice. Tibetans had a big empire, and people were very afraid of them up until around the 9th century. Then the Mongolians had a huge empire, and everyone was terrified of the Mongols. Genghis Khan was coming, a huge problem to many people around the world, Asian as well as Chinese as well as European. And somehow those two societies, influenced by India, they made a choice. The people made a choice. You know what? It's a boring life to live militaristically. It's what Wilhelm Reich called, you live with the emotional play of neuromuscular armoring, where you don't have any inner feeling of your own inner bliss, your own inner streaming. You have pathetic orgasms. You're just like all rigid, and you're all like that because you're brutalized as a child by your father, and then he's brutalized in the school, and then they push the women out of the way, and then they got to brutalize some other people, And so it's just, even you're the victor, you're the conqueror, it's just no fun to live like that. What's the point? Family life is all discipline and whack the kids, and the community life is who's the toughest bully on the block, and it's just ridiculous. And if you have a big military system, you'll have an internal police state. Absolutely, they'll go together. And so those people in the Mongolian Empire, in the Tibetan Empire, in previous Indian empires who were quite powerful, they were like Lord of the Rings. You remember the bad guys actually on the elephants with archers? Remember, only the elf could go jump up on the tail and waste them. Remember that? Well, they had the Indian troops were like that. So when the Macedonians came, they just trampled them. The Macedonian phalanx of Alexander the Great. So Indians were really tough. And then they became more and more happy, ragas, beautiful, love poetry, Kama Sutras like Masters and Johnson in the 4th century, telling the men how to behave. It isn't just Playboy, it's Masters and Johnson. Try to have a little fun and be more soft. And then, of course, you are vulnerable. In those days, they were vulnerable. And, the Raj conquered them, the stiff upper lip Brits, right? They conquered them. And 150 years later, you had the Beatles singing in the ashram. Yellow Submarine. So I don't think we should be so frightened about our boundary law. We should understand the boundary. We should know when we can make the boundary. But it should be our work of art, the boundary. You mentioned something about our work of art. It should not be forced on us by a bunch of identities being shoved down our throats, like we are this, or we are that, or we're middle class, or we're white, or we're black, or we're whatever we are. That's what we don't need anymore. People have to transcend that, and we have educational method. Facebook, 2 billion people you can educate if they have the content. No, they don't have the content. They have destroy democracy and like everybody be an oligarch and oh, never mind. Okay, have a good sleep. It's 9 o'clock. We all need to go to sleep. And we need, thank you, KD. Oh, you're still there. Thank you, KD. I just want to say one thing. Death, one thing that choice makes that choice possible is understanding death. If you understand death as neither being nothing nor being thrown in hell by some really sadistic, weird, uptight, dissatisfied God who never had any fun and therefore he wants to throw people to hell who have fun. So neither of those two things. It's emerging in clear light of the void, infinite bliss energy, briefly, which because we're scared of bliss, people don't stay like that. They claw to have a new boundary body and be back in that alienated situation of me versus the universe, which is the Book of the Dead beautifully describes, which comes from Indian science. It's not somebody going to a fortune teller. It comes from people lucidly dying and remembering the process and describing it generation after generation and adding to the description more refinement and so forth. And so if you overcome the fear of death by understanding that the ground of reality is this infinite blessedness and blissfulness, you don't fear it, in fact. And you of course want to live in the awareness of that. You have a new default position. We are raised, this is very important. This is the one takeaway from any Menla retreat I always want people to have. Anyone, I don't care what the topic is. And that is, if you really analyze yourself from your culture, you have either a very negative view of what might happen to you after death, or this anesthetic view that it'll be nothing, which seems to be at least safe, but actually so boring that in a way, and also you don't really believe it, because nobody really believes that nothing is something they can get, or enter, or be. Nobody thinks. Everybody knows that everything they've ever experienced in life is a continuity of some kind. Even there can be quantum leaps, it's always a continuity. So people approach that, even your rabid materialist approaches death, and they call for the rabbi.